She breastfed Vampire King's starving, abandoned baby. He arrived just as she was about to leave. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The alley behind the diner smelled like rain-soaked cardboard and old cooking oil. Emma Carter stepped out the back door with a bag of trash in one hand and a tired sigh escaping her lips. It had been a long shift, and the neon clock above the grill inside the diner had just crawled past midnight. The street behind the building was empty except for a flickering streetlight and the quiet hum of distant traffic. Emma walked toward the metal dumpster, ready to toss the bag and finally head home to the tiny apartment she could barely afford. Then she heard it, a sound so soft she almost believed it was the wind, a thin, trembling cry. Emma froze. The sound came again, weak, fragile, and desperate. It was the unmistakable cry of a baby. Her heart skipped in confusion. There were no homes nearby, and no families ever walked this alley at night. Emma slowly set the trash bag down and followed the sound toward a stack of old produce boxes near the wall. The cry grew louder with each step. When she knelt and pushed aside a torn blanket, her breath caught in her throat. A baby lay inside the box. His skin was pale, almost unnaturally pale, and his tiny body trembled with exhaustion. His dark hair was damp from the cold air, and his small hands moved weakly, as if searching for something. Emma looked around the alley, expecting someone to appear, a frantic parent, a careless stranger, anyone. But the alley remained silent. The baby cried again, but this time the sound was weaker, like a fading echo. Oh my God, Emma whispered softly. Who left you here? She gently lifted the child into her arms. The moment she touched him, she realized something was terribly wrong. The baby was not only hungry, he was starving. His small body felt too light, and his breathing came in slow, fragile waves. Emma pressed the child against her chest, trying to warm him. The baby instantly grew quiet, as if the warmth alone gave him a moment of comfort. Emma carried him inside the diner and sat down in the empty booth near the window. The bright overhead lights revealed how pale the baby truly was. His lips held a faint bluish tint, and his heartbeat was so slow. Emma felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. Stay with me, little guy, she whispered softly. I am not leaving you here alone. The baby weakly opened his eyes. For a brief moment, Emma saw something strange in them, a faint golden glow deep inside the dark pupils. Then the glow vanished, and the baby let out another weak cry. Emma looked at the clock on the wall, and then back at the fragile child in her arms. Whoever this baby belonged to, they were not coming back, and if she did nothing, the child might not survive the night. What Emma did not know was that across the sleeping city, a storm of fury had already begun to rise. In a fortress hidden far beyond the edge of human sight, the Vampire King had just discovered that his only son was missing. Emma Carter sat in the quiet diner booth with the fragile baby resting against her chest, while the hum of the refrigerator units filled the empty room. Outside, the rain had begun to fall softly against the windows, and the streetlight outside cast a pale glow across the diner floor. The baby stirred in her arms and released another weak cry that sounded thinner than before. Emma felt her heart tighten with worry. She looked around the diner, as if someone might suddenly appear to claim the child, but the door remained closed, and the street outside remained empty. Whoever had left this baby behind had truly abandoned him. Emma gently brushed a strand of dark hair from the child's small forehead and whispered softly, it is all right, little guy, I am here. His breathing was shallow and uneven, and every few seconds his tiny hands trembled as if he were fighting to stay awake. Emma had spent years working long nights at the diner, and she had seen many tired faces and hungry travelers, but she had never seen a baby look this weak. The warmth of the diner slowly began to help, yet it was not enough. The child's stomach let out a faint hollow sound that made Emma's stomach drop. He is starving, she whispered in disbelief. She quickly stood up and carried the baby toward the kitchen area, where the bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. She searched through the refrigerator, hoping to find something gentle enough for a baby to drink, but the shelves held only diner supplies, milk for coffee, bottles of soda, and containers of food meant for late-night customers. Emma poured a small amount of milk into a clean cup and carefully tried to guide a drop to the baby's lips, but the child barely reacted. His head tilted weakly, and the milk slipped away. Emma tried again, But the baby could not drink. His body was too weak. Panic began creeping in her chest. Come on, sweetheart. Please, she whispered softly, you have to eat. The baby made another small cry and curled closer to her chest, searching instinctively for warmth. Emma felt the tiny movement and suddenly froze. A quiet realization slowly spread through her mind. She looked down at the baby and then looked away, uncertain and embarrassed. Even though she was completely alone in the diner, Emma's heart began to race. She had never imagined facing a moment like this, but the truth was clear. The baby needed nourishment, and he needed it now. Emma walked back to the booth near the window and sat down slowly while holding the fragile child close. The rain outside grew heavier, and the diner sign flickered softly above the empty parking lot. Emma took a steady breath, trying to calm her thoughts. It is only until he is safe, she whispered quietly, trying to convince herself. The baby weak cry echoed again, and that fragile sound made the decision for her. Emma gently adjusted the blanket around him and held him closer, offering the only warmth and nourishment she could give. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the baby slowly found the comfort he needed, and his small body relaxed in her arms. The trembling in his hands stopped, and his breathing grew stronger. Emma closed her eyes with relief as the child began to regain strength. Warmth spread through his pale skin, and the faint color slowly returned to his cheeks. She felt his tiny heartbeat grow steadier against her arm, and tears quietly formed in her eyes. There you go, little one, she whispered softly. You are going to be all right. Minutes passed in peaceful silence, broken only by the sound of rain against the diner windows. The baby remained calm, resting safely in Emma's arms, as if he had finally found the safety he had been searching for. What Emma did not know was that far beyond the city streets, inside a vast stone fortress hidden deep within the mountains, a powerful ancient presence suddenly lifted his head. The vampire King Lucian Blackwood stood from his throne with a look of stunned disbelief spreading across his pale face. For hours the royal court had searched for any sign of the missing prince, but the magical bond between father and son had been silent, cold, and empty. Now suddenly that bond pulsed with life again. Lucian's crimson eyes burned with fierce intensity as he felt the faint returning heartbeat of his child. The prince was alive somewhere in the human world. His starving, abandoned son had just begun to live again. Emma Carter remained seated in the quiet diner booth, while the rain continued to fall outside the windows. The fragile baby rested peacefully in her arms, his small body finally warm and calm after the long struggle of hunger. For the first time since she had found him in the alley, his breathing sounded steady. Emma carefully adjusted the blanket around him and studied his tiny face under the soft yellow light above the booth. His skin was still unusually pale, but there was now a faint, healthy color returning to his cheeks. She felt a small wave of relief wash through her chest. That is better, she whispered softly, while rocking him gently. You just needed someone to take care of you. The baby made a quiet sound, almost like a sleepy sigh, and curled his small fingers around the fabric of her shirt. Emma's heart tightened at the innocent trust in that small gesture. She had no idea who this child belonged to, but one thing was already clear: whoever had abandoned him had left him to die alone in the cold alley, and that thought filled Emma with quiet anger. What kind of person could leave a baby like this? She murmured to herself. She glanced at the diner clock hanging above the counter. The glowing red numbers moved slowly forward while the rain continued tapping softly against the glass outside. The parking lot remained empty and silent. The city seemed asleep, while Emma sat alone with a mystery that had suddenly entered her life. The baby stirred again and slowly opened his eyes. Emma froze slightly when she saw them clearly. This time his eyes were not the soft blue or brown she expected. Instead, deep inside the dark pupils, a faint golden shimmer moved like tiny sparks of light. Emma blinked in confusion, wondering if the reflection came from the diner lights, but the glow vanished just as quickly as it appeared. Well, that is unusual, she said quietly, though her voice remained gentle. She reached out and touched the baby's small hand, and he instantly gripped her finger with surprising strength for such a fragile child. That is when Emma noticed something else. A faint warmth spread through her skin where the baby touched her. It was not uncomfortable, but it felt strange, almost like holding something alive with energy. She watched the baby carefully, but he simply looked back at her with calm, curious eyes, as if nothing unusual had happened. Emma shook her head softly. Maybe I am just tired, she whispered. After all, she had been working long shifts all week, and exhaustion could play tricks on anyone. She leaned back in the booth and held the child securely while the quiet Hum of the diner wrapped around them like a blanket for several peaceful minutes. Nothing happened then. Far away beyond the city lights, hidden deep within a massive stone fortress surrounded by dark mountains, something ancient stirred. The great hall of the Blackwood Citadel stood silent beneath towering stone arches illuminated by rows of burning torches. Vampire nobles gathered in tense silence around the throne at the center of the chamber where King Lucian Blackwood stood motionless. His pale face held the cold authority of a ruler who had lived for centuries, but tonight a shadow of fury darkened his expression. For hours the court had searched for the missing prince. The royal guards had spread across forests, mountains, and cities, following every possible trace, yet none had found the child. The magical bond that connected Lucian to his son had gone completely silent earlier that night, a silence that had struck the king's heart like a blade. But suddenly the silence ended. Lucian lifted his head slowly, and every vampire in the chamber felt the shift of power ripple through the air. His crimson eyes brightened with intense focus as the ancient bond between father and son pulsed once again, faint but unmistakably alive. The prince's heartbeat had returned. A deep murmur spread through the court as the nobles exchanged stunned glances. Lucian stepped forward from his throne, his long dark coat moving like a shadow across the stone floor. He closed his eyes, briefly concentrating on the distant signal. The life of his son was weak, but real. Someone somewhere had saved the starving child. Find him, Lucian commanded, his voice calm, but filled with unstoppable authority. His crimson eyes opened again, burning with fierce determination. My son is alive. Emma Carter remained in the quiet diner booth, holding the baby close while the rain outside slowly turned into a steady storm. The soft yellow lights above the counter reflected against the windows and made the empty restaurant feel even more isolated. The child in her arms now slept peacefully, his breathing slow and steady, as if the terrible hunger from earlier had finally passed. Emma gently rocked him back and forth, her eyes moving from his tiny face to the dark street outside. Whoever you belong to, she whispered softly, someone should be looking for you right now. The thought troubled her deeply. A baby this young should not be alone in the middle of the night, especially not abandoned in a cold alley behind a diner. Emma carefully shifted the blanket around him and studied the strange calm that had settled over his fragile body. It felt almost miraculous that he had recovered so quickly. Only a short time ago, he had seemed barely alive. Now his small chest rose and fell with quiet strength, as if a hidden energy had returned to him. Emma brushed her thumb lightly across his tiny hand, and the baby instinctively wrapped his fingers around hers again. The warmth from his touch spread across her skin in that same strange way she had felt earlier, not painful, not frightening, just unusual. Emma watched him carefully, wondering what kind of child had eyes that shimmered with gold light and skin so pale it almost looked like porcelain. The baby suddenly shifted slightly in his sleep and let out a small sound. Emma instinctively held him closer. There you go, she murmured gently. Just rest. The storm outside continued, growing stronger. Wind pushed rain against the diner windows, while thunder rolled quietly in the distance. The empty parking lot remained silent, except for the flickering glow of the streetlight. Emma leaned back against the booth and glanced toward the kitchen clock. Again it was getting later, and the manager would arrive early in the morning to open the diner. She could not simply sit here all night with a mysterious baby in her arms. Eventually, she would have to figure out what to do. Should she call the police? Should she take him to the hospital? The questions circled through her mind, with no easy answers for now. She simply focused on keeping him warm and safe. What Emma did not realize was that far beyond the city, hidden behind towering mountains and ancient stone walls, the search for this child had already begun. In the great hall of Blackwood Citadel, King Lucian Blackwood stood before the assembled court of vampires. The air inside the chamber felt heavy with tension as nobles and warriors waited for the next command from their ruler. The ancient bond between father and son had returned, but it remained faint, like a distant heartbeat echoing across the world. Lucian closed his eyes again, focusing his senses through the ancient connection. Somewhere beyond the mountains, beyond the forests and cities, his son still lived. The presence was weak, but unmistakable. Someone had saved the prince. The king's expression darkened as he opened his eyes. Whoever had taken the child from the royal fortress had intended for him to die alone in the human world. That betrayal would not go unanswered. Lucian's voice carried across the silent hall with calm but deadly authority. My son was abandoned among humans, yet he lives. That means someone found him. A tall, silver-eyed Commander stepped forward and bowed his head. Your Majesty, the royal guards are already searching every city within several hundred miles. Lucian slowly descended from the black stone throne, each step echoing through the vast chamber. His long coat moved like a shadow. Behind him increased the search. He commanded quietly, follow the bond one can feel. His life, returning somewhere, a human has protected the prince. The court grew completely silent at those words. Vampires rarely spoke of humans with anything close to respect, yet the king had just acknowledged that one of them had saved the royal heir. Lucian crimson eyes burned with controlled fury. Whoever abandoned my son will answer to me, he said slowly, and whoever saved him will bring him home. At that same moment, across the sleeping city, Emma Carter gently lifted the baby from the diner booth and wrapped him more securely in the blanket. Preparing to leave, she had no idea that the most powerful vampire in the world had already begun searching for the mysterious child resting quietly in her arms. Emma Carter stepped out of the diner with the baby wrapped carefully in a thick blanket. While the rain continued falling across the quiet parking lot, the storm had softened, but the air remained cold and damp, and the wind carried the smell of wet asphalt through the empty street. Emma held the child close against her chest, protecting his small face from the chilly air. As she locked the diner door behind her, the neon sign above the building flickered softly, casting a faint red glow over the pavement. She looked down at the baby again. His tiny face was calm now, and the earlier weakness had almost completely disappeared. The change still amazed her. Only a short time ago, he had been barely able to cry. Now, he slept peacefully, as if the warmth and care he received had restored something deep inside him. Emma walked slowly toward her small car parked near the edge of the lot. I guess you are coming home with me tonight, she murmured gently. The baby stirred slightly in response and tightened his tiny grip on the edge of the blanket. Emma could not help smiling at the small gesture. Even in his sleep, he seemed to know she was there for him. The drive to her apartment was quiet. The streets of the city were nearly empty at that late hour, and the headlights of Emma's old car cut through the mist. Drifting across the road, she kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting lightly against the blanket beside her, making sure the baby remained safe on the passenger seat. When she finally reached her apartment building, the rain had slowed to a light drizzle. Emma hurried inside, carrying the baby carefully through the narrow hallway of the aging building. Her apartment was small, but warm. A single lamp near the couch lit the living room with a soft golden glow. Emma gently placed the baby on the couch while she searched through her drawers for extra blankets. Soon, she had built a small nest of warm fabric to keep him comfortable. There we go, she said softly while tucking the blanket around him. The baby opened his eyes briefly and looked up at her with that same mysterious calm. The faint golden shimmer appeared again deep within his gaze, and Emma felt that strange warmth spread through her hand as she touched his tiny fingers. She frowned slightly, wondering again if she was imagining things. Still, the child seemed peaceful and safe now, and that was what mattered most. Emma sat down beside him and watched him carefully. As the minutes passed, she noticed something unusual. The baby seemed to be recovering far faster than any normal child would. His breathing grew stronger, and his small movements became more active. He kicked his legs beneath the blanket and looked around the room with quiet curiosity, as if studying everything. Emma laughed softly. Well, someone is feeling better, she whispered. You were barely able to move earlier, but now you look ready to explore the world. The baby responded with a soft sound that almost resembled a tiny laugh. Emma's heart warmed instantly at the sound. She reached out and gently touched his cheek, and the child leaned into her hand, as if seeking comfort again. The connection between them felt strangely natural, as though the baby trusted her completely. Without realizing it, Emma had become the center of safety in his small, fragile world. Far away across the dark mountains, the same mysterious change was felt within the ancient walls of Blackwood Citadel. King Lucian Blackwood stood on the high balcony overlooking the vast forest that surrounded the fortress. The night wind moved through his dark hair as he focused his senses through the ancient bond he shared with his son. The faint pulse of life he had felt earlier was growing stronger. Each passing moment, the prince's presence became clearer. The starving weakness that once filled the bond had been replaced with warmth and calm. Lucian's crimson eyes narrowed with deep concentration. Someone had not only found the child, but was caring for him. The king could feel it clearly now. The prince was safe and sheltered within a human home. Lucian turned back toward the great hall, his expression filled with determination. The human who had saved the royal heir, was unknowingly protecting the most powerful child in the vampire world, and very soon the king himself would find them. Emma Carter sat quietly on the small couch in her apartment while the baby rested beside her, wrapped in layers of soft blankets. The storm outside had nearly passed, and the distant sound of dripping rain echoed through the quiet night. The child had been awake for several minutes, now looking around the room with calm, curious eyes. Emma watched him carefully, still amazed at how quickly he had recovered from the terrible weakness she had seen earlier. Only a short time ago, he had barely been able to cry. Now his small hands moved with surprising strength as he explored the folds of the blanket around him. "You are full of surprises, little guy," Emma said softly, while leaning closer to check on him. The baby turned his head toward her voice, and his golden-tinted eyes focused on her face again. That strange warmth returned to Emma's hand when she touched his tiny fingers, but this time the feeling was stronger, almost like a gentle pulse of energy moving through her skin. She pulled her hand back slightly in surprise, then slowly touched him again. The warmth returned instantly. Emma studied the child with growing curiosity. "What are you?" she whispered quietly. The baby responded with a small content sound and lifted one tiny hand toward her, as if asking to be held. Emma could not help smiling at the gesture. She gently picked him up and rested him against her shoulder. The baby settled comfortably in her arms, as though he had always belonged there. "You must have someone worried about you," she murmured softly. "I just wish I knew who they were." Emma glanced toward the small kitchen, thinking again about whether she should contact the police or take the baby to the hospital in the morning. Yet something deep inside her hesitated. The child seemed strangely calm and healthy now, almost as if he had already received the help he needed. While Emma considered what to do next, the baby suddenly stiffened in her arms. His tiny body became still, and his bright eyes moved toward the apartment door. Emma noticed the change immediately. "What is it?" she asked softly. The child made a quiet sound, not quite a cry, but not quite a laugh either. His gaze remained fixed on the door, as if he sensed something. Emma turned her head slowly, listening to the silence of the hallway outside. At first, she heard nothing. Then, faintly, very faintly, there came the distant sound of movement somewhere within the building hallway. It was subtle, almost too quiet for human hearing. Emma frowned slightly, thinking it might be one of the neighbors returning home late. Yet the baby reaction continued, growing stronger. His small fingers tightened around the fabric of her shirt, and his body leaned closer to her chest, as if seeking protection. "That is strange," Emma whispered while gently rocking him. "It is probably nothing outside the apartment building." However, the quiet street was no longer empty. A sleek black vehicle rolled silently to a stop near the curb, its headlights cutting briefly through the darkness before shutting off. The door opened, and a tall figure stepped onto the wet pavement, followed by two others dressed in long dark coats. Their movements were smooth, controlled, and almost unnaturally quiet. The leader lifted his head slowly, studying the building with sharp silver eyes. The faint echo of the royal blood bond guided him like an invisible thread. The prince was inside the structure above them, alive and protected. Commander Varys of the Royal Guard turned toward his companions. His voice was low, but filled with certainty. "The signal is here. The royal heir is within this building." The other guards exchanged glances of disbelief. They had searched for hours across the entire region, yet the missing prince had been hidden inside an ordinary human residence. The entire time Varys stepped toward the entrance of the apartment building with steady confidence. His senses followed the faint magical pulse that only vampires of the Royal Guard could detect. Somewhere above them, a human had unknowingly sheltered the most important child in the vampire kingdom, and the Royal Guard had finally found him. Emma Carter stood slowly from the couch, while holding the baby close against her shoulder. The child had grown unusually alert, and his golden-tinted eyes remained fixed on the apartment door, as if he sensed something. Emma felt a strange tension rising in the quiet room. She walked a few careful steps toward the door and listened again. The hallway outside sounded almost silent, yet something deep in her instincts whispered that someone was there. The baby made another soft sound and tightened his tiny fingers in the fabric of her shirt. Emma gently rubbed his back, trying to calm him. "It is all right," she whispered quietly. "It is probably just someone walking down the hall." But even as she said those words, the uneasy feeling remained. Outside in the dim hallway of the apartment building, Commander Varys and the two royal guards moved forward with silent precision. Their dark coats brushed lightly against the walls, as they followed the faint magical bond that pulsed like a distant heartbeat, guiding them upward. The building itself looked ordinary. Aging paint, narrow staircases, dim lighting. Yet the signal of royal blood grew stronger with every step. Varys stopped briefly near the second-floor landing and closed his eyes, concentrating. "The prince is above us," he said in a quiet voice. The guard beside him nodded in disbelief. A human building hiding the air of the vampire throne. The commander continued climbing the stairs until the signal became unmistakable. The child was just beyond the door at the end of the hallway. Varys lifted his hand, signaling the guards to remain silent. Royal law required absolute caution when dealing with the air, especially if humans were involved. Yet the moment he stepped closer to the door, something unexpected happened. The faint magical signal suddenly changed. It was stronger than before, far stronger than the weak pulse they had been following earlier. Varys' eyes narrowed in confusion. "That is impossible," he murmured. "The prince had been close to death. When he disappeared, the bond should still be fragile." Instead, the life force inside the apartment felt stable, calm, and protected. Varys slowly approached the door and listened carefully. From inside the room, he could hear the quiet movement of a human voice, soft, gentle, and filled with concern. The commander glanced toward the other guards. Whoever had found the child was not harming him. In fact, the human inside seemed to be caring for him with remarkable devotion. Varys reached for the door handle, but stopped before touching it. Royal law forbade harming a human who had unknowingly protected a member of the royal bloodline. The king himself would decide the fate of such a person. Inside the apartment, Emma shifted the baby slightly in her arms, still watching the door. The strange feeling had grown stronger, as if the air itself carried a quiet pressure. She took a slow breath and walked closer to the entrance. "Are you expecting visitors, little guy?" she whispered softly. The baby suddenly turned his head toward the door again and made a small, excited sound. Instead of the worried noise he had made earlier, his tiny hand lifted slightly, as if reaching towards something beyond the wall. Emma stared at him in confusion. That is when a very gentle knock sounded from the door. The sound was soft, respectful, almost cautious. Emma's heart skipped in surprise. No one ever visited her apartment at this hour, especially not during a storm. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly approached the door, still holding the baby securely against her shoulder. "Who is it?" she called quietly through the door. A calm male voice responded. "Miss Carter, please do not be afraid. We believe you have found someone very important." Emma felt a chill pass through her spine. The baby in her arms remained calm, even curious, as if he recognized the voice beyond the door. Emma looked down at the child again, then back at the door, her mind racing with questions. Whoever stood outside knew about the baby, and somehow they even knew her name. Emma Carter stood frozen beside the apartment door, while the baby rested quietly in her arms. The gentle knock still echoed in the silent room, and the calm voice from the hallway lingered in her mind. "Miss Carter, please do not be afraid. We believe you have found someone very important." Emma's heart beat faster with confusion and caution. She had never heard that voice before, and yet whoever stood outside seemed to know both her name and the child she was holding. The baby, however, seemed completely calm. His small golden-tinted eyes remained focused on the door, and his tiny hand lifted again, as if reaching toward the unseen visitors. Emma took a slow breath, trying to steady her thoughts. "Who are you?" she asked. Through the closed door, the voice answered again, still calm and respectful. "My name is Varys. I am here because the child you rescued is in great danger." Emma looked down at the baby, then back toward the door. Her instincts told her something unusual was happening, yet the man outside sounded sincere. The baby shifted slightly in her arms and made a soft, curious sound, as if encouraging her to open the door. Emma hesitated for another moment, then slowly turned the handle. The door opened just a few inches, and Emma cautiously looked into the dim hallway. 3 tall men stood outside, dressed in long dark coats. Their posture was calm but alert, and their eyes reflected the hallway light with an unnatural brightness. The man in front stepped forward slightly. His silver eyes met hers with a calm, respectful expression. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "thank you for protecting the child." Emma felt a strange mixture of relief and suspicion. "If you know this baby," she said carefully, "then why was he left alone?" In an alley, the 3 men exchanged brief glances. The man called Varys answered quietly, "The child you found was taken from a place where he should have been safe. Someone wanted him to disappear." Emma tightened her hold on the baby. Instinctively, the child responded by resting his head against her shoulder, as if trusting her protection. She looked at the men again and noticed something strange. Their movements were extremely controlled, almost too smooth. and their presence carried a quiet intensity that made the air feel heavier around them. "Who are you really, Emma?" asked the silver-eyed man, lowered his voice. "The child you are holding is not an ordinary child, Miss Carter. He belongs to a family that has protected this world for a very long time." Emma frowned slightly. That answer only created more questions. The baby suddenly turned his head toward the man called Varys and gave a small excited sound. The reaction surprised everyone in the hallway. Varys' expression changed slightly. The prince recognized him even in human form. The guard lowered his head slightly. "In respect, Your Highness," he said softly. Emma's eyes widened. "The prince," she repeated slowly. "What are you talking about?" The two guards behind Varys remained silent, but their attention stayed focused on the child, as if guarding him even from the hallway air. Varys looked back at Emma and spoke carefully. "The baby you found is the son of a king." Emma felt the words sink in slowly. "A king?" she repeated with disbelief. The baby in her arms yawned quietly, as if completely unaware of the tension around him. Varys continued, speaking with calm honesty. "His father has been searching for him all night. The entire royal guard has been searching." Emma's mind struggled to process what she was hearing. "This cannot be real," she said quietly, yet the strange warmth she had felt when touching the child and the golden shimmer in his eyes suddenly made more sense than she wanted to admit. "If what you say is true," she asked, "then why is he here with me?" The silver-eyed commander answered with a tone filled with respect. "Because you saved his life, Miss Carter, and without you the prince would not have survived the night." Emma Carter stood in the open doorway of her small apartment, while the three strangers remained in the dim hallway outside. The baby rested calmly against her shoulder, as if completely comfortable in her arms, but Emma's mind raced with confusion and disbelief. "A prince," she repeated quietly. The words still felt unreal. The silver-eyed man named Varys nodded slowly. "Yes, Miss Carter, the child you rescued is the heir to a very powerful kingdom." Emma looked down at the baby again. The child blinked sleepily and reached one tiny hand toward her chin, as if playing with a loose strand of her hair. He looked so normal, so innocent, that the idea of him belonging to royalty seemed impossible. "I found him in a trash box behind a diner," she said softly. "Someone left him there alone. If he really belongs to a king, then where were you?" Varys lowered his eyes slightly, and his voice carried a tone of restrained anger. "Someone betrayed the royal family. The prince was taken from his home and abandoned in the human world." Emma felt a wave of shock run through her chest. "Abandoned?" Deliberately the baby shifted again and made a quiet sound as if reacting to the tension in the room. Emma gently rocked him to calm him. The two guards behind Varys exchanged uneasy glances before one of them spoke quietly. "Commander, the law." Varys nodded slowly before looking back at Emma. "There is something you must understand, Miss Carter," he said carefully. "The prince belongs to an ancient bloodline, one that must remain hidden from the human world." Emma frowned slightly. "I do not care about ancient secrets," she replied firmly. "I only care that this baby was starving when I found him." Varys' expression softened for a moment. "We know," he said quietly. "That is why we came with respect. You protected him when no one else could." Emma looked at the three men again. Their calm posture and quiet authority felt almost military, yet there was something else about them, something unnatural. Their eyes reflected light in a strange way, and their movements were too controlled, too precise. Something inside Emma's mind began connecting the pieces. The strange warmth she felt when touching the child, the golden shimmer in his eyes, the unnatural strength returning to him so quickly, the quiet, powerful presence of these men standing in her hallway. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You are not talking about an ordinary kingdom, are you?" Varys met her gaze directly. "No, Miss Carter, we are not." The baby stirred again and suddenly turned toward the commander with curious interest. Varys bowed his head slightly. "In respect, Your Highness," the prince responded with a soft sound almost like a happy laugh. Emma's eyes widened again. "Wait," she said slowly. "What kind of king sends soldiers like you to search for a baby?" Varys hesitated for only a moment before answering honestly. "The king is not sending soldiers, he is sending his royal guard." Emma's heart beat faster. "Royal guard?" she repeated. "Yes," Varys said quietly. "The child father is King Lucian Blackwood, ruler of the vampire kingdom." The words hung in the air like thunder. Emma stared at him in stunned silence. "Vampire kingdom?" she whispered. The baby in her arms yawned peacefully, completely unaware that his true identity had just been revealed. Emma looked from the child to the three men in the hallway. Her rational mind struggled to reject the idea. Yet every strange moment of the night suddenly made sense. The golden eyes, the unusual warmth, the rapid recovery from starvation. "You are telling me," she said slowly, "that this baby is the son of a vampire king?" Varys nodded calmly. "Yes, Miss Carter. He is Prince Adrian Blackwood, heir to the throne of the vampire world." Emma Carter remained standing in the doorway of her small apartment, while the words spoken by Commander Varys echoed through her mind. The son of a vampire king. The idea sounded impossible, yet every strange detail of the night suddenly felt connected. The baby in her arms moved gently and rested his head against her shoulder, as if none of the tension around him existed. Emma looked down at the child again. His pale skin now carried a faint, healthy warmth, and his golden-tinted eyes blinked slowly with calm curiosity. This tiny child could not possibly belong to the dark legends people whispered about, yet the quiet authority in the hallway and the strange energy she had felt since finding him made it harder to dismiss the truth. Emma lifted her gaze back to the three men. "If what you are saying is true," she said slowly, "then why would anyone abandon the son of a king?" Varys' expression darkened slightly. "The betrayal that placed the prince in danger is still being investigated. Someone within the royal court wanted the heir removed." Emma tightened her hold on the baby instinctively. "That means whoever did this might still be looking for him." Varys nodded with quiet certainty. "That is correct, which is why we must return him to his father as quickly as possible." Emma hesitated. The baby responded by wrapping his small hand around her finger again. The simple gesture made Emma's heart tighten. "I found him alone and starving," she said softly. "I cannot just hand him over to strangers." Varys stepped forward slightly, but his tone remained calm and respectful. "Miss Carter, you are not handing him to strangers, you are returning him to his family." Emma studied his face carefully. The silver eyes of the commander reflected the hallway light in a strange way, but his expression held no threat, only a deep sense of responsibility. The baby suddenly turned his head toward the hallway again and gave a soft, happy sound. Varys immediately bowed his head. "Your Highness," he said quietly. The guards behind him also lowered their heads with silent respect. Emma watched the moment in disbelief. Even as a baby, the child carried authority over these powerful men. Varys slowly straightened again. "There is something else you should know, Miss Carter," he said carefully. Emma looked back at him. "What is it?" Varys spoke with quiet honesty. "The prince survived tonight because of you. Without the nourishment and warmth you gave him, his life force would have faded completely." Emma felt a small chill at those words. She had only done what any human being would do. The baby stirred again and looked up at her with those bright golden eyes. Emma gently touched his cheek, and the child responded with a soft content sound. Varys watched the moment with a thoughtful expression. The bond between them had already formed stronger than he expected. "Miss Carter," he said slowly, "the king will want to meet the person who saved his son." Emma frowned slightly. "That sounds like a very dangerous invitation." Varys answered calmly. "The king is powerful, but he honors those who protect his family." Before Emma could respond, the quiet hallway suddenly changed. A heavy presence moved through the air like a silent storm approaching. The guards straightened immediately, and their attention shifted toward the far end of the corridor. Varys' eyes widened slightly. He stepped back from the doorway and lowered his head in deep respect. Emma felt the change instantly. The baby in her arms lifted his head and looked toward the hallway with excitement. A moment later, a tall, dark figure appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving with calm, unstoppable confidence. Even before Emma could see his face clearly, she felt the weight of his presence fill the entire building. The Vampire King had arrived. Emma Carter felt the air in the hallway changed before she even saw the man approaching. The three guards immediately stepped aside and lowered their heads with deep respect, and Commander Varys bowed in silence. The powerful presence moving toward the apartment door carried a quiet authority that made the entire corridor feel smaller and heavier. Emma's heart began beating faster, even though she did not yet fully understand why. The baby in her arms, however, reacted very differently. Little Prince Adrian suddenly became alert. His golden eyes brightened with excitement, and he lifted both tiny hands toward the hallway, making a soft, joyful sound. Emma looked down at him in surprise, then slowly raised her eyes again. The tall figure continued walking forward with calm, deliberate steps. His dark coat moved gently with each motion, and the dim hallway lights reflected across his pale face. When he finally stepped into the light, Emma understood immediately that she was looking at someone far from ordinary. The man stood tall, with sharp features and eyes that burned a deep crimson red. His presence carried an ancient quiet power that made the air around him feel colder and yet strangely alive. Behind her, Emma heard Commander Varys speak in a low, respectful voice. "Your Majesty." Emma realized in that moment that the most powerful vampire in the world was standing only a few steps away. From her apartment door, King Lucien Blackwood stopped several feet away from Emma. His gaze moved instantly to the child in her arms, and for the first time the controlled calm in his expression shifted. The powerful king, who had ruled for centuries, looked at the baby with something far deeper than authority. He looked at him with the fierce protective focus of a father. Prince Adrian made another small sound and stretched his tiny hands toward Lucien. As if recognizing him, the king took one slow step forward, but stopped himself before coming too close. His crimson eyes studied the child, carefully searching for any sign of weakness. The prince looked healthy, calm, and warm in the human woman arms. The bond between father and son pulsed strongly, now stronger than it had been since the moment the child disappeared. Lucien finally lifted his gaze to Emma Carter. Their eyes met, and Emma felt the full weight of his presence. She had never felt anything like it before. His stare was intense yet controlled, as if measuring every detail of the situation. "You are the one who found him," Lucien said quietly. His voice was calm, but carried deep power. Emma swallowed nervously, but managed to nod. "Yes, I found him behind the diner where I work. He was alone and starving." Lucien's expression darkened slightly at those words. The guards in the hallway remained perfectly still as the king processed the information. For a moment the silence stretched across the small corridor. Then Lucien spoke again, his voice softer but filled with meaning. "You saved my son." Emma shifted the baby gently in her arms. Prince Adrian reached toward his father again, but did not cry or struggle. He simply looked happy to see him. Emma studied the king carefully. "You are his father," she said quietly. Lucien nodded once. "Yes." Emma hesitated for a moment before asking the question that had been troubling her since the guards arrived. "If he is a prince, then how could anyone leave him to die in an alley?" Lucien's eyes darkened with quiet fury. "Someone within my world committed a betrayal," he said slowly. "That betrayal will be answered." The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop with those words. Even the guards looked tense. Emma looked down at the baby again. The child had no idea how dangerous his existence truly was yet. Despite everything, he remained calm in her arms. Lucien's gaze returned to Emma Carter again. There was now a new expression in his eyes, not suspicion, not anger, something closer to respect. "My son lives because of you," he said quietly. Emma Carter stood quietly in the doorway of her apartment, while the powerful figure of King Lucien Blackwood faced her from the dim hallway. The rain outside had almost stopped, and the entire building seemed to fall into a strange silence, as if the world itself had paused to witness the moment. The baby Prince Adrian rested peacefully in her arms, unaware of the tension surrounding him. His tiny fingers held the fabric of her shirt, and his golden-tinted eyes slowly blinked as he looked between Emma and his father. Lucien's gaze remained fixed on the child for several seconds. The ancient ruler, who had commanded armies and ruled a hidden kingdom for centuries, now looked only like a father, confirming that his son was truly safe at last. He took another careful step forward, stopping just close enough to see the child clearly. Prince Adrian responded instantly. His small arms reached toward Lucien with innocent excitement. The king lifted one hand slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement might disturb the fragile peace of the moment. For a long second, the powerful vampire did nothing more than gently touch the child's small hand. The connection between them was immediate and unmistakable. The bond of royal blood pulsed through the hallway with quiet strength. Commander Varys and the other guards remained perfectly still, witnessing the reunion in respectful silence. Lucien's expression softened slightly when the baby wrapped his tiny fingers around the king's hand. "My son," he said quietly. Prince Adrian gave a soft content sound and leaned slightly toward his father. Emma watched the moment carefully. She could see the powerful emotion hidden beneath Lucien's controlled expression. The king, who had arrived with the presence of a storm, now seemed focused only on the small life in her arms. Lucien finally lifted his gaze to Emma Carter. Again, his crimson eyes were calmer now, yet they still carried the weight of centuries. "You protected him when no one else could," he said softly. Emma shook her head slightly. "I only did what anyone would do. I found a baby who needed help." Lucien studied her face for a moment, as if evaluating the truth in her words. "Most humans would have walked away," he said. "You did not." Emma glanced down at the baby again. He tightened his small grip on her shirt, as if confirming the king's words. "I could not leave him there," she replied quietly. The silence that followed felt thoughtful rather than tense. Lucian looked at the child again, then slowly extended both arms toward Emma. "May I?" he asked. The request surprised her slightly. For someone so powerful, the king's voice carried genuine respect. Emma carefully placed Prince Adrian into his father's arms. Lucian held the child with surprising gentleness. The powerful vampire, who commanded the loyalty of an entire kingdom, now cradled the baby with the quiet care of a devoted parent. Prince Adrian immediately relaxed against him and gave another soft, happy sound. Lucian closed his eyes briefly, as if allowing himself a moment of relief that he had denied for hours. When he opened them again, his attention returned to Emma. "Carter, you saved the life of the heir to my throne," he said slowly. "That debt cannot be ignored." Emma felt uncertain about where the conversation was leading. "I did not help him because I expected anything in return," she replied. Lucian nodded. "Once I understand, yet the world my son belongs to is not safe, especially now someone powerful tried to erase his existence tonight. You protected him without even knowing who he was." Lucian paused before continuing. "The king of vampires does not forget such loyalty." Emma looked at the baby resting calmly in Lucian's arms. Then she looked back at the powerful ruler standing in her doorway. "I only wanted him to be safe," she said quietly. Lucian's expression became thoughtful again. "That is exactly why I must make a decision," he said, "and that decision will change your life, Miss Carter." Emma Carter stood quietly in the doorway of her apartment, while King Lucian Blackwood held his son in his arms. The storm outside had passed, and the hallway was now completely silent, as if the entire building was listening to the decision that was about to be made. Prince Adrian rested peacefully against his father's chest, his small hands gripping the dark fabric of Lucian's coat, as if he had finally returned to where he belonged. The powerful vampire king looked down at the child for a long moment. His crimson eyes softened in a way that none of the guards had ever witnessed before. Then slowly, he lifted his gaze to Emma. "Carter, you gave my son warmth. When he was abandoned, you gave him life. When he was starving," he said quietly, "in my world, that is not a small act." Emma shifted her weight, slightly, still unsure how to respond. "I only did what felt right," she replied softly. "He was just a baby." Lucian nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "but he is also the future of my kingdom." Commander Varys and the other guards remained silent behind the king, their posture straight and respectful. They all understood that the next words spoken by Lucian would shape the outcome of the night. The king looked down at his son again. Prince Adrian stirred slightly and opened his golden-tinted eyes. For a moment, the baby reached one tiny hand toward Emma Carter. Even though he was now resting safely in his father's arms, Emma felt her chest tighten at the small gesture. She had only known the child for a few hours, yet the connection between them felt real. Lucian noticed the moment as well. His expression became thoughtful. "The prince remembers who protected him," he said softly. Emma gave a small nervous smile. "I guess babies know when someone is trying to help them." Lucian looked back at her carefully. For centuries, he had ruled a hidden world of power and secrets, yet the young woman standing in the doorway had done something no warrior or noble had accomplished. She had saved the life of his only son without knowing who he was. The king finally spoke again. "Miss Carter, you said you only wanted the child to be safe." Emma nodded. "That is still true." Lucian took a slow breath, then made his decision. "Prince Adrian will return with me to the royal citadel, where he will be protected. But there is something else." Emma waited silently. Lucian's voice remained calm but firm. "The person who saved the heir to the vampire throne will never be forgotten in my kingdom. You will always have the protection of the royal house." Emma's eyes widened slightly. "You mean you will protect me?" Lucian nodded. "Yes, anyone who threatens you will answer to me." The guards behind him lowered their heads in agreement. Emma let out a small breath. She had not realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. The baby made a soft, happy sound, as if satisfied with the decision. Lucian gently adjusted the blanket around his son, then turned toward the hallway. The guards stepped aside immediately to clear the path. Before leaving, Lucian paused once more and looked back at Emma. "Carter, my son lives because of your kindness," he said, "and even the coldest kings remember kindness." With that, the vampire king walked down the hallway, carrying his child safely in his arms. The guards followed silently behind him. Within moments, the powerful presence that had filled the building disappeared into the quiet night. Emma remained standing in the doorway, watching until the hallway was empty again. The strange night had finally come to an end. She closed the door slowly, and leaned back against it, letting out a long breath. Somewhere out in the dark city, the Vampire King had taken his son home safely. And in a small apartment above a quiet street, Emma Carter would forever remember the night when a starving, abandoned baby changed her life and reminded a powerful king that even the darkest worlds can be touched by simple human kindness.